Celine, you want to go for it?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Transracial Adoption. We're going to be discussing microaggressions and how to respond. My name is Whistling Cledgett, and I am honored and excited to be here with you. I am the adoption parent inquiry specialist with the Snowflakes Embryo Adoption Program, where I have the awesome privilege of walking alongside of families who are navigating the beautiful yet complex journey of embryo adoption. This work is so deeply meaningful to me, not only professionally, but also personally, as I am also a transracial adoptee. And my story begins in Haiti, where I was born, and I was adopted at the age of 5 and was raised in a very predominantly Caucasian family community here in the US, in New York. And growing up in the 90s, microaggression and those moments of feeling difference were, I would probably say, all too common. And so, like many families and transracial adoptees, I had to navigate identity, belonging, and questions of who I am and my culture. And so this journey is just super important, and definitely want to be able to share the challenges and also the beauty. And one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about our conversation today. And joining me is Kim Latier. And Kim, I'll let you introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, so for me, this is very important as well, not only professionally, but also personally, as I parent a child through a transracial adoption, who we as well have also experienced as microaggressions that Whistling so diligently introduced us to. And so we are going to kind of just dive in today on that. We also have Jeanette Parker, who we'll let you do a brief intro, Jeanette, on yourself, who's helping navigate the tech of this presentation, which we will be recording, and so that will be available at later times as well for you to refer back to. I will say that we ask that everybody be respectful to each other during any comments in the chats. We will have a Q&A, but the audio is disabled for you guys as far as talking about it, but you can put comments in the chat section, and Jeanette will be monitoring that for us as well. So Jeanette, you want to just kind of introduce yourself and who you have sitting next to you so that they are aware of what staff is on.
Yes, my name is Jeanette Parker. I'm one of the foster care advocates here in South Carolina. I was a licensed foster parent for many times, so I did have transracial experience with placements that I've had in and out of my home, and have been able to see some of the microaggressions that they have suffered through or have been challenged with. Sitting next to me is Ariel. She is our intern from Florida State University.
All right, well, great. We'll get started. Thank you so much again for joining. So just a brief overview of what we're going to be talking about today. Our discussion is first just giving a brief introduction of microaggression, really defining what that is going to be. Maybe some of you are not necessarily familiar with microaggression, or you are very familiar with that as something you experience on a regular basis. We'll talk about the different types of microaggressions and how this is going to impact you, your family, your children. And then lastly, we want to respond how to respond to these microaggressions. And then we'll provide you some resources at the end as well. So we will be working together today to understand, explore, and identify how to respond to transracial microaggressions. We will also identify how these microaggressions impact various aspects of family and children's lives. In the US, there is about 40% of transracial adoptions. And oftentimes, these families encounter frequent microaggressions that invalidate their family. So I'm going to let Kim walk us through these different types of microaggressions.
Okay, so there are three types of microaggressions that we are going to look at today. And with that, what they are, and we're going to begin with what the definition of a microaggression is, and then go into the three different types. So according to Psychology Today, a microaggression is an everyday verbal, nonverbal, and environmental slight, snub, or insult, whether intentional or unintentional, which communicates hostility, derogatory, or negative messages to target persons based solely upon their marginalized group membership. So in many cases, these hidden messages may be invalidating the group identity, the experiential reality of a targeted person, and demean them on a personal or group level, communicate them as lesser human beings, or suggest that they do not belong to the majority group, threaten and intimidate, or relegate them to an inferior status. So with that, what we have seen, some examples of microaggressions that you may have often heard as a family are they yours? Or they're so lucky to be adopted by you? Or where are they from? Or they speak such good English? Or your family is beautiful? Or is he or she yours? How much did you pay for your baby? Examples that your kids might hear, are those your real parents? Are those where are you really from? I don't see color. Comments on hair, skin tone, or culture may also be an example of a microaggression. And so breaking that down, we're going to look at what are some examples of micro assaults, micro invalidation, and micro insults. And so to start that, a micro assault is a conscious and intentional discriminatory action using racial epithets, displaying white supremacist symbols, or preventing one's son or daughter from dating outside of their race. So micro assaults are deliberate and intentional slights towards those that are meant to be hurtful, intending to call names, being avoidant behavior or purposeful discrimination actions, intentionally using abusive language, clutching or moving a purse or bag when you're around certain people. And microassaults are actually quite common, and sometimes the individual committing the microassault doesn't even really understand how serious it can be. For instance, jokes that are mocking or degrading of a racial ethnic group, someone who's disabled, or sexual history is an example of a microassault. Normally, that person telling the joke would respond by, I was only joking, or nonetheless, their biases is manifested in their interactions as it perpetuates harmful stereotypes. And that is from Dr. Geets, who was at the Cleveland Health Center. Micro invalidations are communications that substantially exclude or negate or nullify the thoughts, feelings, or experiential reality of a person of color. For example, a white person might often ask Latinos where they were born, conveying that they are perpetual foreigners in their land. It's sometimes when we discredit or minimize the work of experiences who is from an unrepresented group. For example, saying an Asian American coworker is sharing a time when they felt disrespected, and you interrupt to say that they weren't discriminated against, or start talking about your own experiences to contradict what they've shared. Micro-invalidation seems to be the most prominent microaggression experienced on a day-to-day basis. Lots of people will have the experience when they feel like no one is listening to them, or they seem invisible in the room. And that, again, is from Dr. Geets at the Cleveland Clinic of Health on speaking about microaggression. Micro insults. Those are verbal and nonverbal and environmental communications that subtly convey rudeness and insensitivity that demeans a person's racial heritage. They can be examples of a employee asking a coworker of color how she got his or her job, implying she may have landed it through an affirmative action or quota system. They're rude, insensitive comments that subtly disrespect a person's based on their identity or racial heritage. Examples of some of these might be following someone around a store because you think they're going to steal, turning away from them to avoid someone altogether, scheduling meetings or events that conflict with a religious observation or observance or obligation. Sorry. Allowing a certain person to work on high visibility projects just so that you appear to be meeting the needs of that diversity. Asking a Black person, can I touch your hair? Dismissing people who bring up race in a workplace or in a classroom, leaving them that they should leave their cultural baggages or their concerns behind. Asking an Asian American born and raised in the U.S. And complimenting them on how well their English is, and discrediting them as a true American.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself there. So now we're going to discuss the areas where microaggressions can be found. This is something that many transracial adoptees and individuals in marginalized communities experience regularly. And as we said before, microaggressions are subtle, often unintentional comments or actions that convey bias, stereotypes, and dismissiveness towards someone's identity, whether that's their race, their culture, their gender, their religion, their ability, and even more. And a lot of these sources could come from those who are closest to us, like our friends, our families, our teachers, strangers, and even professionals too as well. Microaggressions has often been described as death by 1,000 cuts. Why? Because each comment or slight might seem small on its own, but over time, they build up and can deeply affect a person's mental health and emotional health. There has been a powerful analogy that I really like where it compares them to mosquito bites. So one bite might be annoying, but getting bit again and again, it becomes unbearable. And Dr. Gitu Gates, one of the many researchers of microaggression, shares that if you start to experience a lot of them at once, they become annoying and even disabling. And so we find these areas where these impact, where microaggressions are impacted. So with race, which is an insidious, pervasive form of racism, a brief everyday exchange that tends to deintegrate messages to people of color because they belong to a racial minority group. So common examples, I've experienced and other people have experienced. One that I've heard was, "You're the whitest Black person I know." This was something that was said to me as I was growing up. I was often called an Oreo, just how even my speech, or because I grew up with more predominantly in a Caucasian culture. So I was always, the term was used, I was Black on the outside, but white on the inside. Another microaggression is denying that racism exists. A lot of people say, I don't see color. That still is dismissing that it still exists. Accusing someone of being too sensitive when they're hurt by a racial comment. Another area is culture. So praising someone's English when they were born and raised in the US just because they're not white. or someone saying, wow, you speak very well. So it's being trivialized and being disrespected on their culture and their background and their traditions. With religion, this is irrational fears or misunderstanding of a person's religious beliefs and values. It's being belittled, excluded based on someone's religious beliefs. Common examples of religious microaggressions is scheduling meetings or events during important religious holidays and observances, especially in the workplace, or maybe not offering food options that respect various dietary restrictions. Sexual orientation. This is an irrational fear rather than the systemic and interpersonal discrimination and marginalization that exist. So a lot of people face microaggressions and where people ask intrusive and inappropriate questions, and also using derogatory stereotypes and language. And even gender and age, people face microaggressions in this area where they experience prejudice, stereotyping, discrimination against their person and their gender. You see this a lot with women. We experience this where people tell us to smile or don't be too emotional. And with age, especially for people who are still in the workplace and wanting to still advance in their career, and they might experience microaggressions concerning their age. Some might say, like, don't give this assignment to so-and-so. They're too old, or they might not understand the new technology. And then the last part is experiencing microaggressions in economic and health status. So this is assumed based on someone's appearance, their behavior. It's dismissing a person's lived experience and demeaning behavior, dismissing a person with a disability and disability as unimportant. Example of economic status, like walking into a very expensive store and having someone come up to you and say, can I help you? Like having just like that already prejudice, assuming based on someone's status that you don't belong here. So those are microaggressions. It's all of these really just are invalidating a person's identity. It's saying that you don't belong here. And so we want to shed light to these and be informed and how to respond to all of these. So what I really want to, with the next slide here, Jeanette, is invite you. I know a lot of you are professionals, some of you are parents. I'd love to hear your experiences. And if you can, let's open up the floor in the chat and share some real life experiences that you faced with microaggression, especially with what we discussed. Maybe you've experienced it based on your gender. Maybe you experienced it based on your culture or your race. So yeah, if you guys can, write down some of the examples, real life examples of how you've faced microaggressions. Give some examples.
Looks like Jessica's taking the time to comment. But I can give an example. I just met with a Mormon family this week, and they themselves kind of shared their own religious microaggressions of, if we have the misunderstanding that we don't believe in Jesus Christ, but we do, and we believe that he's our Lord and Savior. And they were just very, very quick to respond to me when I just asked generally about their religion, that I was already going to have that notion. And I was like, no, I know that you guys believe in Jesus Christ. So they were already guarded before I even asked that question, just because of how many times that they've dealt with that microaggression.
And I can share one so my daughter's now 16, but I remember like it was yesterday that, when she was just a baby, like 6, 8 weeks old, I had somebody ask me in the store if I leave her outside so that she can get tan, because she's biracial. And so that, that was a response that, that a question that we got. And then even when she hit elementary school, um, and they were studying Black history, a little boy in her class asked her if she would be their slave, because of just the conversations of Black History Month and apparently how he was raised and that kind of thing. So those are a couple of my personal experiences. Thanks, Jeanette, for sharing yours. Whistling, do you want to share maybe one or two yours while Jessica is still typing?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the biggest one was what I shared earlier was, being called an Oreo, or yeah, you speak really well for being Black. And I had a roommate, I can think of one where she made just a racial insensitive comment, and I didn't appreciate. And I remember her specifically saying, why are you so sensitive? And so, yeah, those are definitely, they are hurtful, they're hard. And like, it's those little mosquito bites, like the more you get those, they're tiny. And as they start to build up, they start to fester. And then that really just starts to affect you.
I mean, I
think
can
Ariel
even.
has one as well.
Yeah, I'm Hispanic, I'm Cuban, so a lot of people always, especially here in South Carolina, think I'm automatically Mexican because I guess there's a lot of Mexicans here. But they always comment on my accent. And like, oh, you learned English so well. And it's just, a notion just because I'm Cuban, maybe I was born there, that I have a certain accent or way of speaking.
Thanks for sharing that. I can also remember my daughter swam competitively. And that was another thing that she used to get is, oh, well, Blacks don't normally swim, so how can you be a swimmer and swim competitively? Which I thought was great because it was about the time that we had a lot of gold medalists in the swimming that were African Americans. So yeah, so let's give it a second, and while we see if there's any comments.
So Jessica commented that we do get microaggressions with her children. Usually older women follow them around. If they respond, they usually respond that they are worried about the child trafficking and just being safe, because my children don't match us. How do you explain to some nosy people that not only are they wrong, but that people aren't truly snatching kids the way they show in the movies or TV, and children are actively bullied by their fathers? Like, we know darn well you weren't trying to protect my kids, Brenda. Also, my teen son and I get looks everywhere we go because he is tall, broad, Latino man, and obviously is a thug. And my youngest daughter gets called Taco at school because she is Mexican. She isn't. My kids are Colombian. I think
Thank
that's
you,
very
Jessica.
true.
Thank you, Jessica, for sharing that. Whistling, you want to kind of talk about that? And then we are actually going to talk about towards the end on how to respond to some of those microaggressions that we got.
No, absolutely. And that is such a great example. You shared so many different types of microaggressions right there. And we will definitely share about those and how to respond. I really want to share and talk about like the impacts of how that impacts you, and also how that impacts children. So thank you so much for sharing, Jessica. And yeah, let's get right into that on talking about how the impacts on microaggressions. So microaggressions aren't just small annoyances that we can brush off. Over time, they can take a real toll emotionally, physically, and relationally, especially when they go unaddressed. And the impact doesn't just fall on one person. So you're going to see that it impacts you, and it impacts your child. And so let's take a look first at impacts on children with microaggressions. So these subtle, as you might maybe see here, Jessica, these subtle, persistent messages can shape your child's self-worth, their sense of belonging, and even how they view their own racial and cultural identity. With parents, as you are trying to protect your child and be advocates for them, this also can affect you too as well. And definitely can lead to guilt and helplessness. And then for biological parents too as well, we definitely want to touch on that. But let's first begin with microaggressions and how they can impact children, particularly adopted children, and especially in transracial families. Research has shown that ongoing exposure to microaggressions can lead to serious health concerns, like high blood pressure, depression, sleep problems, substance abuse. You see with physical health, we've definitely seen children experience like headaches, stomach aches, maybe trouble sleeping, fatigue, especially if they're not bringing these situations to you. If this is something that they're hearing outside, maybe at school, as they're grocery shopping, it's not always something that they're always going to come to you and say, "Mommy or Daddy, someone said this to me," and they just start to store that, and that those stress they are internalizing, and that can lead to physical symptoms, chronic stress, trauma responses too as well. And it also can even impact healthcare engagement. So sometimes children can also experience microaggressions with healthcare providers. And so with that, that really just starts for them to feel unheard and unsafe, and can also lead them to maybe even start missing their appointments and or even reduce their treatments too as well. When it comes to emotional health, one of the most damaging effects is silencing and isolation. When it's not talked about, when adoption isn't talked about openly, or when it's treated as something uncomfortable or taboo, children can start to suppress their true feelings. And then they begin to internalize the belief that their emotions and their experiences don't matter, or worse, they might make others uncomfortable. This can create emotional isolation, where a child feels alone even with their own family. And let's not overlook the impact of self-worth and shame too as well. So harmful comments, even the subtle and unintentional, can lead to deep, lasting damage to a child's self-worth. They're going to feel like they're less than. They're going to feel like there's something wrong, or they don't necessarily belong. And this is going to create emotional exhaustion too as well, where they have to constantly defend, their family structure. I always had, like, as traveling with my family, and you would always get those looks. I was always having like some ready comment to say, like, "Oh, why we look different," and or I was worried that someone was going to make a comment or notice. And so that does can get emotionally draining. Next, that can be
I wanted
impacted.
to comment just a minute. Matt
absolutely.
was able to respond to some of his examples that he had with his children. There's times where he gets the question of what's wrong with her, knowing that his daughter looks healthy on the outside, but they know that he adopted a special needs child. Or how did you get her? Or did you know anything about her real parents? And then, of course, what we touched on before of how much did she cost?
Yeah. that's, yeah, we're definitely going to touch on that too as well. And that's another area that's impacted is special needs too as well. Um, so with identity, go back one more, Jeanette.
I just want to chime in on the impacts on children, and I think we don't take this. Sometimes we forget of just the constant when they're at doctors of having to put, I don't know my medical history because I was adopted, or the need to have to always carry an adoption decree or a passport or something. I know my daughter at age 12, we were coming back through customs and immigration in Atlanta, coming back from just a vacation. And she got asked with her passport that matches my husband's and my last name, who are these parents or who are these people that you are traveling with? Because she didn't look like us. And I mean, she was old enough, and she looked at the customs officer and was like, "My parents? Like, why are you even asking me this question?" But that's another great example of the impacts on children that we're talking about, the identity of those kinds of things. And having to tell families, make sure you've got an adoption decree with you, especially if your kids aren't old enough to be able to verbalize, and even still, then there's still going to be questions.
Yeah, it definitely leads to identity confusion and even invalidation. And, they're constantly struggling like, okay, well, who am I? Where do I really belong? And so it's not uncommon for them to feel like they're not fully part of either their adoptive family or even like their birth family or even culture too as well. Some children might feel like, well, I don't belong in my ethnic group because I don't identify that or act like share these same experiences, nor do I belong in my adopted community or ethnic group. And so sometimes even children can start to feel like they're second rate or damaged. I've heard so many comments where families assume that adopted children are difficult or they have bad behaviors. And then there's also that unspoken rule that they have to be grateful for being adopted. There's just that underlining that they have to perform and prove their worth to their families or to outsiders. So that's definitely something that impacts identity. With mental health, all of this is going to take a stress on their mental toll, where a lot of research has shown that adopted children and individuals are overrepresented in the mental health settings, where they have higher levels of adjustment difficulties, where they might have anxiety, depression, even suicidal thoughts too as well. So for a child still forming their sense of self, being constantly told directly or indirectly that they don't quite belong or are different can feel crushing. And these aren't just passing wounds. They're messages that can take root, grow into feelings of shame, rejection, and emotional isolations if left unaddressed. And as parents, as advocates, as supporters, as caregivers, it's important for you to recognize these impacts because we want to create a safe, open, and supportive spaces for them to express themselves freely and be affirmed for who they are. So let's take a look at impacts of microaggression on adoptive and biological parents. And as you see here, the emotional, the mental, and the physical aspects, impacts of microaggressions are very similar to those struggles of adopted children. And as adoptive parents, like children, you face those societal expectations that can be very overwhelming. And you might worry about your bond with your child or feel insecure about your place in their life. And with biological parents also, they experience a lot of emotional pain, whether that also be guilt and shame or judgment that comes with that decision to place their child for adoption. And these feelings can echo in the child's life, their own sense of identity and their place in their family. And so common things that I've seen, and you've probably also experienced this, is this rescue complex where you might hear, and I've heard this from my mother too, is, oh, you're such a hero for adopting. You're saving a child. Someone I remember specifically called my mother Saint Doris because it was such a wonderful thing that she did to adopt me from another country, an impoverished country. And while that is meant to be flattering, it can also feel like a lot of pressure. And you are not their savior, you're a parent, and that connection is based on love and not rescuing. And this mindset can create a distance between you and your child. I've also a kind of common is a microaggression that parents hear a lot is, couldn't you have adopted your own, couldn't you have your own children? And that assumption is uncomfortable because it's that thought of being judged for not having your own biological children. And then there's the wealth stereotype where Matt, you mentioned too as well, is because adoption can be expensive, people often assume you adopted because you could afford it. And this assumption can lead to awkward questions like, well, how much did adoption cost? How much did your child cost? And these questions can make you feel uncomfortable and also affect your child's understanding of their own story that they were not bought. So there's many other parts with microaggressions with adoptive families. But two common things I've seen with biological parents, birth parents, and for adoptive families, whether that being in, those of you who've gone through the foster route or adopted domestically or internationally, is being aware of also the birth parents and their experiences and what they common assaults that they have been experienced. So one common one is, how could you give your child away? And so with birth parents who place a child for adoption, it can feel incredibly hurtful. People don't always understand the decision to place a child for adoption. And it's often made with love and care and sacrifice, and it's not easy. And it certainly wasn't that they were giving their child away. You hear a lot of they gave their child away, and that is a hurtful thing to say to a birth parent. Or they hear from other families, people, strangers, oh, I could never give my child away. And this is, judging their decision, and it's not meant to express sympathy. And so that makes them feel isolated and misunderstood. So those are some common impacts, especially with when it falls down to like the mental health, identity, and emotional of impacts on adoptive and biological parents.
Whistling, I'm going to chime in real quick on two other ones that I hear while I'm working, sometimes with adoptive families doing home studies before we can really dive into education. And so this is something that we, I think as professionals and those of you that have walked the road of adoption might want to help educate those that are preparing for adoption, is that there's the automatic assumption, microaggression, that birth parents may be either really young or they may be using substance abuse. I had a prospective adoptive parent say to me one day, oh, they must be young and be a junkie. And I'm like, no, we have some birth parents that, are in their 40s and they're professionals and they just wanted a better life of a two-parent household. And so those are some other examples that we need to think about as being impactful on the biological parents of our children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great. All right, next, let's talk about the shared impacts of children and parents. We've talked about specifically how it impacts children, specifically with parents and biological parents. Now let's see what it looks like, how it affects your relationship and dynamic with your children, and also your mental well-being. So 3 common areas is hypervigilance, anxiety, strained relationship, and distorted view of social media. And with hypervigilance, this is like the constant questioning that you get from strangers, from family members, is that feeling to always need to defend and explain yourselves. And this is both with you and your child, is that social withdrawal and anxiety, that fear of judgment in daily interactions. So when you hear that, is that your real child? How did you get them? It's that constant feeling that you need to explain and defend yourself. As I shared before, that I was just always anxious in a social setting, going to outings or grocery stores and expecting someone to make it obvious or say something that I had to be ready to give an example. It can also lead to strained relationships. So microaggressions from family members, peers, teachers, and even faith communities can erode trust and connection. It makes you start to distrust, especially with faith communities, as you start to pull away because you feel so out of place, or maybe you feeling that you stick out, you don't fit in. And children may feel emotionally distant or misunderstood, especially if they're not given the space to express themselves in related emotions, adoption-related emotions. And then the last part is the distorted view from society and media. So negative media portrayals can reinforce stereotypes and create a sense that their experience is abnormal or even shameful. And they may even struggle to see healthy, positive representations of families like theirs. So with microaggressions, they can create real emotional burdens for both parents and children, feeling misunderstood, always needing to educate others, and feeling invalidation can take a toll. It's important to recognize these challenges and work together to create a more supportive and an even compassionate environment. So what all this boils down to is that adoption isn't just a journey for the child, it's for everyone involved. Understanding that both adoptive and biological parents face emotional challenges is also key to creating a more supportive environment for your child and for each other. So that boils to ask the question is, what do you do when someone makes a comment that feels off about your child's adoption? Do you ignore it? Do you struggle with how to respond? So we're going to take a few minutes now to discuss the responses, like how to equip yourself and how to equip your child when reacting to these insensitive comments.
And with that, with going into how to respond, if we could have some people maybe share in the chat, or Jeanette, if you or Ariel have any comments on this, on what are some ways that you've talked to your children or about racist comments or experiences, and have you had those conversations that maybe you didn't realize that your child was having racist comments, but using that as a teachable moment in preparing them. And so that's kind of what we're going to lead into next. But just curious, before we go into how to respond, like what are some of the comments or things that you have gotten, and how have you dealt with those yourself?
Jessica gave a good example of what she says to those that are making comments or suggestions or whatever of whatever made you think that was an appropriate thing to say, and then watch them flounder.
I love it. I love it. I will be honest. So going back to my comment, I was definitely in parent mode and not professional mode the day that I had somebody ask me how my daughter gets tan if she's out, if I take her outside. And keep in mind, she was only about 8 weeks old at the time. I looked at them and I said, yes, I use a spatula to flip her back and forth.
Wow.
Because I was a new mother, I was tired, I was sleep deprived, and I was not in my professional element at that point in time. So in how to respond, we're not always going to see eye to eye with everybody, but we need to find that when a conversation with someone is important, or they're completely unaware of how they were coming across, or they don't realize the language they're using is outdated and rooted in perpetual stereotypes that don't help promote inclusivity. So it's best to have a conversation to counter their ways of thinking, is what Geist recommends. And sometimes you just have to walk away, or come up with snarky comments, like I used. And I love Jessica's comment on what I think she was being probably much more polite at that time than I was when I said, yes, you just flip her with a spatula. So we're going to kind of go into some of those. I will kind of throw out one resource. I know that Adoption Learning Partners has a great webinar on conversation and what to say, and talking about that in cross-cultural conversations and those kinds of things. But again, we're also not talking just about, we are talking about race today, but we can also be talking about gender. I have a lot of families that I've worked with in my 20 years of working, doing homestays, that in the beginning would always say they wanted a girl because they thought boys were harder to raise. I have 2 boys and a girl, and I will say they are all hard to raise at some points in their life, and some are easier at other points in life. I would not say that one gender is more easier to raise than the other, at least not in my experience of raising 3. So how to respond. We are going to prioritize culture and education. Oh, I'm sorry, let me back up real quick. How to respond. In your toolbox, remember that words count, recognize the flaws of our culture. It would be important for each of us to take an implicit bias test to see where we are, even within our own households, as to where we might be able to learn. Do that by intentionally celebrating other cultures and travel and plan a trip. And so with that, we're gonna look at what is prioritizing cultural education. Raise your children of a different race by being proactive and learning about their cultural and background. Learn from adult adoptees and what their experiences are on microaggressions. And so thank you for joining this workshop today to hear from those that have experienced that. And thank you those that have chimed in for giving your input, because like I said, this will be recorded and it will be able to go out to other families that are adopting in the future or that have gone through these things. Equip yourself to support your child and build their resistancy. Support identity formation. Help your child navigate their race and cultural identity in a healthy, affirming way. Help them understand and appreciate cultural backgrounds. Tell your child about their adoption and biological roots and regulate to normalize that. I always tell families when I'm working with them on the very, very get-go of a home study, do not wait till you think that your child is old enough to understand or ask questions. Start from the beginning so that it gives you a baseline for you to be comfortable when they quote unquote don't know what you're talking about yet, but it also becomes a regular part of your conversations, just as if you're having a conversation about adoption versus biological children. And then that way it gives them, your child, the comfort level of knowing that these are okay conversations to have from the beginning. And so that if they do have questions, that's one thing I can say about when my daughter was in 1st grade and she was asked by somebody if she wanted to be a slave. Those were conversations that we had already been having, so that when that came up, she knew that it didn't make her feel good, and she knew it was wrong. So she came immediately home to us to have that conversation. And I just appreciate the fact that we had laid that foundation for her. Involve your whole family, not just your household members, but your extended family. Those people that are going to be in your child's world and those that are with you, that they can come behind you when they see things, because our kids aren't with us 100% of the time. They are also with other family members. Empower older siblings. If you're adopting a child into your home, or you have a child in your home that is of a different ethnicity or race or religion, cultural standpoint, to go ahead and start preparing those siblings for comments that may come out on the soccer field or the baseball field on, oh, what do you mean that's your brother or your sister, where they don't look anything like you, or they talk differently. Those are kinds of those conversations to prepare your other kiddos in your home for. Even if you've got adopted kids, it can be the reverse. One of my very dear friends, she is African American and adopted. Her and her husband are a transracial couple, and their adopted kids are Caucasian. And for the longest time, until she had really established a relationship with her pediatricians, every single time she would take her kids to the pediatrician's office, she was asked if she was their nanny, because it was just the opposite. Instead of me being Caucasian and having a biracial and Black daughter, it was the opposite for her. She had Caucasian children, and they just assumed that she was employed to be those children's caretakers. Expose your kiddos to heritage through birth culture, through music, through books, through media, traditions, and cultural and religious events. Jeanette, you can go down to the next slide, sorry. And then let your child lead. Be sensitive to your child's developmental stage. Let them decide how much engagement that they want to have, but also make it part of your everyday experiences, so that way you can go on to what's going on to the next one. Jeanette, you can go to slide 17.
Actually, sorry.
Oh, yeah, show me what you see.
Okay. How to respond. Remember to keep learning as a parent. Seek mentors of your child's race and culture. Ask questions. Show your children that you want to be part of this. Find people that are like-minded with you, as well as diverse, so that those people, your kiddos, have safe conversations and safe people to have those questions and comments with, if they feel like they can't get the answer from you. Be a safe place. Again, this kind of goes through that unconditional support of your child and exploring their racial identity. Get involved in meaningful causes. Support organizations and missions that support your child's birth country or cultural group. Speak up for inclusivity, thank you, in schools and local groups. Engage in conversations that you're aware of. Stick with them through their challenges. Recognize their racial identity. Development can be hard. Be steady, supportive presence throughout their journey, and acknowledge and affirm your child's feelings, and remind them it's okay to feel hurt and that the situation isn't their fault. Perfect example, just this week, my daughter was struggling with feeling too white and too black, but not black enough. And then in some instances, she feels not white enough and too black. And so that is a hard situation for her sometimes. Create immersive experiences. Go on heritage trips. Go to culture camps. Regular opportunities to connect with children of your roots. Think outside of your neighborhood. Enroll your kiddos in events with, you might have to drive a little bit farther. Enroll your kids in community events and activities where they can learn from people that are supportive, or that look like them, or sound like them, or those type of things. And stay open to learning. This is only a beginning. We're just starting this. And that we all need to listen to what adoptees are and continue to grow in that process.
Yeah. And can you go back one more slide here, Jeanette, too? I wanted to add on to that first one, where keep learning as a parent. I'd also add too is reflect on your own beliefs, because believe it or not, you might also have your own thoughts, prejudice. Reflect on like what, a common ideas, misconceptions that you might have. I think of my mother. She was 60 years old when she adopted me, and so she grew up in the 50s, and she had a very different idea, and she had her own stereotypes and biases of different ethnic groups, and that transferred in how she raised me and what she taught me, and some of it was well-meaning, and some of them were very hurtful. So common things is like misconceptions or common terms that we use that might not necessarily be correct is using terms like your real parents or adoptive parents, like real versus adoptive, or blood is thicker than water, or like grateful and lucky adoptee expectations, or even cultural superiority, or like that rescuer mindset that we talked about. And then, for the next slide here is, just teaching your child some response strategies. So talking to them, letting them know what microaggressions are. So, like examples like, why do you talk so proper? Things that your children are going to hear. Where are you really from? Or you're pretty for a Black girl. I heard that as a child. So teach them to speak up, that what they said wasn't okay, as you said, Jessica. Or please don't say those things like that. It's hurtful, or that makes me uncomfortable. Teach them to ask questions. So why did you say that? What do you mean by that? And help them to remember who they are. Teach them you are wonderfully and beautifully created. Your skin is beautiful. Your hair is beautiful. And it's okay to feel upset sometimes. Also, teach them to walk away. You don't have to stay and listen. Tell a trusted adult, or talk to me afterward. And then teach them to stand up for others. This is a big one we don't also often think of, is that wasn't nice. Please don't say that, or we don't talk like that. You're going to have, I think we're going to be able to have some of this information to you afterwards, so you guys can definitely have some of these resources. So we'll even go on to the next slide. And Rebecca, you said, my young child was shunned by several families in her nursery school because she had several multiracial siblings. I think this affected me more than did her. And she said that they didn't serve our family. Wow. Yeah. Oh, I love how she said that. Yes. Teach them to stand up for others and for themselves. These are some great resources, some books to read. Where are you from? This is more of a Hispanic Latin America a book, really just delving into the culture, especially when people ask you, where are you from? And especially for your child that might not necessarily understand what that means, or not so different. This is really just talking about the diversity, the different types of questions, and the whether we are all who we are. We are all different, but we are all loved and appreciated. I can't believe you said that. This one doesn't necessarily deal with microaggressions, but talks more about social cues. But I thought since you're creating opportunities to talk to your child, this is a great one to even just start having them be more self-aware, and even mention just how even adults say some things that we can't believe they said that, and how we need to work on our social filters. And yeah, and then I think Kim, you want to talk about these other ones that you've included?
Yeah, so Ouch Moments is actually a book that actually teaches parents how to talk about microaggressions with their kiddos. And there is like a question answer in the back. Anti-Racist Baby, again, also talks about things that they may come in contact with, and how we as parents can shape them in that. It Takes More Than Love is by Brittany Solomon. She is actually a parent of children that were adopted transracially. It talks about a Christian's guide. I can't read the small print. It's a Christian guide. And so in each chapter, she will talk about, how to raise and parent children that are multi-ethnic, and how to navigate that world. there it goes. It takes more than love, a Christian guide to navigating complexities of cross-cultural adoption. And in that book, at the end of each chapter, there's some discussion questions to kind of get you thinking. So those are some other ones. I see a question. How do you answer the question, where are you from? From the country, or no, I live in Wisconsin. My kiddos are too young, so we get a lot of, why doesn't she look like you? So those are great things that you can either use those for as teaching moments, and have answers ready and prepared so that you can answer those in a loving manner in front of your kids that can empower them for older. So just, why doesn't she look like you? You can simply say, God creates all people differently is a great answer for that. If you want to share a little bit about adoption journey, you can say that. But again, that goes back to who you're talking to at the point in time. How do you answer from where you're from? That, again, is up to you as how much detail you want to give at that point in time. You can say, they're from here. I do that a lot with, my child, they're an American. They don't need to know the details of that. If you want to provide additional education to somebody, or depending on how much detail you want to go into, that is something that you can kind of take on. But remember that even at a young age, your kids are listening to your answers, and that's going to affect how they respond to you and how you respond to them, or how they respond later in life. So those are just kind of some examples on answers on that. But yeah, I lost my thought. Sorry.
So we are running out of time, and thank you so much for everyone being here. I mean, we could talk all day about this, the different type of experiences, examples, but we really just created this so you can be your child's best advocate. As Kim said, this is just really just grounds for you to start creating teaching moments, helping them navigate their emotions, being aware of these types of insults. They're, as you probably noticed with Matt, like, these are invasive. They're and then it's, making that choice of how much you want to give, how much you want to educate not only your child but others too as well. For our last slide here, Jeanette, is you can definitely reach out to us. For further information, here is, if you want to take a snapshot of this, Kim works with our Renewed Hope program. This is her contact information and email. You can also reach me too as well. Like I said, I am the Snowflake's adopting parent coordinator, inquiry specialist. And then Heather Sloan as well, and she is our director of Post-Adoption Connection Center.
Two things. One, I just noticed Heather's email address is wrong on the last slide. It is SLOAN, not ONE for her last name, in her email address. And then somebody made a great comment that you can always turn some of the questions back on that person. Ask your child answering your child is from the state you live in, and then ask them where they're from. It can help drive in the awkwardness of that question, and maybe they won't continue doing it. And so that's a great response too. Again, you can turn it back on the person asking, and kind of put them, as Jessica originally said, letting them flounder in the awkwardness of them asking those questions. But so those are a couple other comments. Again, like I said, please note that Heather's email address is spelled incorrectly on that final slide.
All right, thank you so much for joining. Hopefully this was informative, encouraging, and then we will stay tuned for further updates, especially on our post-adoption site, for other trainings for you guys to join and be a part of. Have a great day and enjoy. Take care.
Thank you.